For my third interview, I'm interviewing Alice here. Alice, do you want to tell me what you kind of did with your career?
Are you starting my career, or are you?
Yeah, kind of. What have your life experiences kind of
Yeah.
taken you?
Are you? How did I get to Clark College, and how did I get my degree?
Yeah,
And then what did I do with my degree thereafter?
yeah.
Okay. Well, to get my degree, it was pretty difficult because my parents weren't on the wealthy side, and they didn't have any extra money to send me to Clark College because it was very expensive at that time. And when I graduated from senior high, I was trying to decide what I was going to do, and I had married Dalzell for a teacher for phys ed, and I thought, hey, I can do her job. I can do a better job than she does teaching phys ed. And so I thought, well, how can I get a college, pay for a college, and then get the degree, and then teach thereafter? So I took a job at Dupaco, the packing house,
Mm-hmm.
and I worked in the canning department, and I packed Vienna sausages and canned hams and uh, anything that would go into a can
Right.
for overseas shipment for the troops overseas. And so I worked at the packing house for a couple of years, and I said, this job has got to go. I didn't like the job at the
Mm-hmm.
packing house. And so I had saved enough money to go to Clark. And so I went up and enrolled at Clark, and I stayed there for 2 years. And then I thought, ooh, this place is so expensive. I can go to the University of Iowa. My two brothers were at University of Iowa. And they said, well, come on down. You can go a lot cheaper to the University of Iowa than Clark College. And so I got out of Clark, and I transferred down to University of Iowa. And then when I got to University of Iowa, I said, the only thing I want to do is teach phys ed. And so they said, well, how many credits did you get from Clark, and what did you all take at Clark? I said, well, I took all my science classes, my chemistry, my anatomy, and my earth science classes. I took my science classes that would apply, and I also took English composition, that was, and I can't remember offhand, a few other, I think I took a math requirement
Mm-hmm.
at Clark. And then after my freshman year, it was summer, it was just ending up my freshman year, and this nun, I think it was Sister Xavier at Clark, she met me in the hall and she said, you haven't paid your tuition. And I said, well, I know that, sister, but I really don't have the money. And she said, well, would you be willing, it was the end of the year, like May or whatever, and she said, well, would you be willing to go out of town for a job? And I said, well, I'll go any place and I'll do anything. And so she said, would you go out to Yellowstone Park? And I said, sure would. I said, if there's a job out there, I'll go. And so she said, well, here's an address, and if you write that address, I'm sure you'll get a job. She said, did you ever do any waitress work? And I said, well, not really. I said, but I sure could handle that. And so she said, well, if you'll write that and tell them you'd like to be a waitress and you'd like to work at Yellowstone Park, you'll get a job. She said, I'm almost 100% certain that they'll hire you. And so I did that, and that's how I got my job out at Yellowstone Park, and I worked at Old Faithful for 2 or 3 summers thereafter, and I saved enough money to go to college and finish and get my degree. And boy, that was a stroke of good luck. I didn't realize how fortunate I was to be working out there, because I made very good tips at Yellowstone
Mm-hmm.
Park, especially at Old Faithful Inn, because that's the #1 attraction. So, and then I transferred down to the University of Iowa because my two brothers were
Right.
down there, and my one brother said, well, if you're really in a financial bind, I can help you out. He had gotten out of Korea, just gotten out of the Korean War. And he said, I get a check from the government for retiring from the military, and so I can help you out a little bit if you really need it. And so he helped me at University of Iowa to pay the bills, because it's not cheap going to college degree,
Right.
especially University of Iowa. So, but I was glad I went there, and so when I went there, I told him, I said, well, I've got all these requirements out of the way, and now the main thing I want to focus on and concentrate on are the phys ed classes.
Right.
So things worked out real well, and then I graduated and had my degree. And when I graduated from University of Iowa with my degree in phys ed, they told me at the placement office, they told me that I could get a job in any of the states neighboring. I could get a job in Iowa, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin. Right. They told me I could get a job, and they were right. So I took this job up in Michigan, and Walled Lake, Michigan. And I taught at the junior high there for a couple of years. And then I thought, well, I want to get a little closer to Iowa. And so I resigned from my job up in Michigan, and I took a job up in Mason City, Iowa. And I stayed there in the junior high, Roosevelt Junior High, I think it was. And I stayed there for a couple of years, and I enjoyed that. It was a very good job. And then I was dating my future husband at the time, and he was getting a little impatient. He was wanting to get married, and I was wanting to teach phys ed. So it was maybe. I gave him the maybe. Well, maybe I will decide, but I got to teach and get the use out of my degree. And so I taught for a couple of years in Mason City, and it got pretty cold up there sometimes, and I thought maybe I ought to move a little bit to the south and get in southern Iowa. And so I took the job down in, first I took the job in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and I taught there for a couple of years at the high school. And Kenosha was a school like Wahlert, very good school, and it was a very good job. I really enjoyed it over in Kenosha. But my future husband was working at John Deere, and I thought, well, if I get a little closer, maybe I would think of getting married. So then I moved to Galesburg, Illinois. And that was a very good phys ed program. That was everyday phys ed, and the kids loved it. And I really enjoyed that job. I stayed there 5 years, and then I decided my husband was either going to get married or move on. And so he says, yeah, we're getting married or I'm out of here. So I said, well, okay, I'll get married. He says, you got two choices. You can either get married or I'm gone. And so I said, well, I'll get married then. And I got married, and then I moved back to Dubuque. And he was working at Deere's. And I was looking for a job, and I didn't have one at the time, and so I applied and I substituted. We got married and I substituted for a year, and then I got the job here at Dubuque Senior, and I was there for 30 years. I really enjoyed that. Looking back, it was a very good job, and I enjoyed that.
Well, thanks for your time.